Have you ever wondered about the significance of medals in sports? Do they merely represent victory, or could they also contribute to racial supremacy? These questions might seem unusual, yet they open up a fascinating exploration into the world of sports and its intersection with societal issues. The gleam of a gold medal, the pride of a silver, the resolve of a bronze. These are not just symbols of personal achievement, but they can also serve as mirrors reflecting broader narratives about race and power. It's not just about who wins or loses, it's also about who gets to play, who gets recognized, and who gets left behind. The world of sports isn't just a microcosm of society. It's a stage where societal dynamics are played out in real time with real consequences. So, let's embark on a journey to unpack this intriguing topic. Join us as we delve into this intriguing topic. To fully grasp this issue, we must first rewind the clock and explore the historical roots of racial inequality in sports. The playing field, it seems, has not always been level. From the very beginning, systems of power and privilege have shaped who gets to play, who gets to win, and who gets to make history. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sports were primarily the domain of the affluent and the powerful. People of color were often excluded, barred from participation due to a potent cocktail of social, economic, and political constraints. This exclusion was not just about the denial of opportunity, it was about the denial of humanity, of dignity, of worth. Landmark events, such as the racially segregated sports leagues of the United States in the mid-20th century, tell a tale of a world where sports were not just about talent, but about the color of one's skin. It was a world where the likes of Jesse Owens and Jackie Robinson were exceptions, not the rule. Fast forward to the second half of the 20th century and we find a landscape that has begun to shift. The civil rights movement, the end of apartheid in South Africa, the growth of the Olympic movement, all these changes started to open doors, even if only a crack. Yet, despite these strides, racial discrimination in sports still persisted, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. As we moved into the 21st century, the landscape continued to evolve. Athletes of color started to make their mark, breaking records and shattering stereotypes. But even as these victories were celebrated, the echoes of the past still reverberated. The achievements of athletes of color were often seen as exceptions, as anomalies, not as evidence of a level playing field. Truly, the past paints a vivid picture of racial inequality in sports. It reminds us of the deep-seated biases that have shaped the world of sports, biases that continue to influence who stands on the podium and who watches from the sidelines. It underscores the need for us to confront these biases and to strive for a world where the color of one's skin does not dictate the color of one's medal. Now let's examine the racial demographics of medal winners in various sports and competitions. Medals are more than just shiny tokens of achievement, they are a mirror reflecting societal norms and disparities. When we look at the racial breakdown of medal winners, we find a fascinating, though sometimes troubling story. In the world of sports, the representation and success rates among different racial groups vary significantly. For instance, in track and field, athletes of African descent often dominate the podium. This dominance is often attributed to genetic advantages, a notion that is both scientifically debatable and potentially harmful, as it can perpetuate stereotypes and reduce the athlete's hard work and dedication to mere genetic luck. On the other hand, we see a different picture in sports such as swimming and gymnastics, where athletes of European descent have traditionally been more successful. This discrepancy may be less about inherent ability and more about access to resources, opportunities, and representation in these sports. Now let's look at team sports. In basketball and football, for example, we see a higher representation of athletes of African and Latin American descent. However, once we move into management and coaching roles, the representation significantly drops, highlighting another facet of racial disparity in sports. These disparities are not just about who's winning, they're about who's seen, who's valued, and who's given the opportunity to excel. The demographics of medal winners can reinforce stereotypes of racial superiority or inferiority, influencing perceptions and expectations in and outside of sports. The implications of these demographics are far-reaching. They can shape societal narratives about racial groups, their abilities, and their worth. They can influence the opportunities racial groups receive, the support they are given, and the way they are treated. The numbers don't lie. They tell a compelling story of racial disparity. But remember, these numbers are not destiny. They are a call to action, a challenge to redefine representation and a starting point for meaningful change in the world of sports. Stereotypes and biases unfortunately play a significant role in sports. Now you might think, not in my game or not in my team, but let's dive a little deeper and see how these subtle yet powerful societal constructs shape the sporting world. Racial stereotypes often influence our perceptions of an athlete's abilities and potential for success. For instance, certain races are often pigeonholed into specific sports or positions. We see this in the stereotype of African athletes excelling in sprinting or basketball, while Caucasians are often associated with sports like swimming or golf. These stereotypes may seem harmless, but they can limit opportunities and shape expectations for athletes of different races. Now let's consider biases. Racial bias in sports is not always overt. It can be as subtle as a coach's preference towards players of a certain race, influenced by their own preconceived notions. Such biases can affect an athlete's chances of success, from selection for teams to scoring in competitions. To illustrate, let's look at a few case studies. A study published in the Journal of Sport and Social Issues in 2023 found that referees in professional basketball were more likely to call fouls on players who were not of their own race. Another study in 2022 revealed a racial bias in football, where black quarterbacks were more likely to be benched after a poor performance compared to their white counterparts. These instances of racial bias not only impact the individual athletes, but also reflect in the medal standings. When opportunities and fair play are skewed by racial stereotypes and biases, it's no surprise that the distribution of medals mirrors these inequalities. So, what's the takeaway from this? It's not about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about recognizing that these biases exist, often unconsciously, and working towards a more equitable sporting world. Because at the end of the day, sports should be a celebration of human achievement and diversity, not a breeding ground for stereotypes and biases. Clearly, racial stereotypes and biases still have a stronghold in sports. Medals are not just metal, they carry symbolic weight that can reinforce narratives of racial superiority. Indeed, the gleaming gold, silver, or bronze disc that hangs around an athlete's neck is more than just a physical token of achievement. It's a symbol, a representation of triumph that goes beyond the sporting arena. It's a narrative of dominance, and when it comes to race, it can unfortunately perpetuate harmful stereotypes and hierarchies. In our global society, the medal count at international sports competitions is often scrutinized and interpreted through various lenses, including those of race and ethnicity. Medal standings can, unintentionally or not, reinforce racial hierarchies when they seem to correlate with racial or ethnic lines. The media, with its power to shape public discourse, plays a significant role in this process. The narratives it spins around medal achievements can subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, reinforce perceptions of racial superiority. Medals, it seems, are powerful symbols wielding influence over our perceptions of racial superiority in sports. The influence of race on sports achievement doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's entwined with other facets of identity like gender and socioeconomic status, a concept known as intersectionality. This notion posits that these identities don't operate independently. They interlock, shaping the opportunities and experiences of athletes in nuanced ways. Consider this. A wealthy white male athlete has a distinct set of experiences from a female athlete of color from a low-income background. Their race, gender, and financial standing all play a role in the challenges they face, the support they receive, and ultimately, their chances of standing on the winner's podium. This intersectionality can compound the barriers that minority athletes face. It's not just about race, but how race interacts with other identities. Understanding this complexity is crucial in addressing the racial disparities we see in medal achievements. The intersection of multiple identities adds another layer of complexity to this issue. Addressing racial inequality and supremacy in sports is no easy feat. It's a complex issue that demands our collective action. The challenges are many, from ingrained systemic biases to the lack of representation in leadership roles. However, these obstacles are not insurmountable. To promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, we must first recognize the power and privilege that shape the sporting world. We need to question the status quo, challenge stereotypes, and make room for diverse voices. This work extends beyond the field of play. It includes coaches, organizations, and policymakers. Coaches can foster inclusive environments, nurturing talent from all backgrounds. Organizations can prioritize diversity in their leadership and decision-making processes. Policymakers can enact legislation that promotes equality in sports. It's not about taking away from the deserving, but about giving everyone a fair shot. After all, sports thrive on competition, and what's more competitive than a level playing field? Change is possible, but it requires concerted efforts from all of us.